Thank you very much and welcome to Civil Service Live. Again, it seems only a year ago we were getting together here just after the election and the formation of a coalition government. It's been a pretty momentous year if you look back on it. For myself, highlights, Civil Service Awards in November at Buckingham Palace. Anyone in the audience was there? Yay, few. Hopefully later this year we'll get good nominations through for the next award session so we can celebrate that at a venue yet to be decided, but we'll announce that soon and it will be somewhere exciting. So big year, Buckingham Palace. For me personally, I got to, as you do as Cabinet Secretary, go to the royal wedding, went with the Queen and the Prime Minister to Ireland for a very historic visit there, which was about putting the past behind you. State banquets with President Obama, when I was able to tell him that I was the one with a real apostrophe, as opposed to the Obama he claimed in Ireland, and Wembley, but I won't go into that because that's a bit sad for the Champions League final. Didn't quite work out. Not everything goes as you would hope it does. But the coalition, to be honest, when I look back on the first year of a coalition government, we were worried. The one thing with hindsight I'd say is if you're going to have a coalition and bring two parties together, the idea of having them then go out and campaign directly against each other in a referendum, when you're trying to bind them together as a team, possibly not the best thing for team cohesion. And that proved quite difficult from where I sit. A big thank you to everybody in the room, because I know we have imposed a great deal of challenge in your lives. It has been a very hectic year. This government didn't come in and I think as Tony Blair said in his book, A Journey, that for the first 2 years he thinks with hindsight they wasted those first 2 years back in '97. They actually came in with a big radical reform agenda, and if you look at health, education, welfare reform, across the whole piece, we have thrown at you really big changes. Of course, the background is getting the public finances into a sustainable position, deficit reduction. That's meant big, tough challenges for us. Global financial crisis, bankers performing rather less well than one would like, and certainly massively less well than they were rewarded for. But it's something that we've all had to put our shoulders to the wheel to get deficit reduction going. And it's meant some tough times for civil servants, pay freezes, job cuts, and all the rest of it. We are honest and open about that. We know these are difficult times. Globally, it has been quite a year, but I'll let Simon go into details there. But I want to mention the future. When you think about what we're doing now, we are, as a civil service, adjusting to these circumstances. There have been voluntary redundancy campaigns across lots of departments. We are moving to a situation, recruitment freezes, where we are getting ourselves into a sustainable position. And I can see a year, 18 months into the future, a world where we're moving out of these difficult times, and we're looking to a world where actually as a civil service we'll be able to say we played our part in getting back to a situation of sustainable public finances, getting the civil service on a sustainable footing. We will have built on our reputation, which I think is very high, for managing impartiality, managing transitions of governments, helping governments on policy change, but also now being able to deliver efficiency improvements so that we get to that situation. So I can see a future where the civil service reputation has been massively enhanced by showing not only that we can deliver on the policy front, but we can also deliver change well. And that's a big challenge for all of us. Part of Civil Service Live this time will be to engage you in getting your views about how we best get to that future. And I should stress, Civil Service Live is not about one way. You're not there, surprise, surprise, because you're civil servants, you'll understand this. You're not there just to sit there. I expect you to engage all the time. We'll have short introductions from the panel, but then I want your questions. I want to know the issues that you're facing, the kinds of challenges you see for the civil service, and to get the views of our panel. So we want to engage you in that, and then basically we will all need to go away and deliver and implement this government's programme there's a fixed-term bill going through Parliament, so we expect the next election, if that goes through, and the coalition keeps itself together politically, to be in May 2015. So they have quite a long programme. So we have a great panel to talk about all of these events. Let me introduce them. First of all, we have Simon Fraser, who is the head of the Foreign Office, the first person, I think, ever to have headed the Foreign Office, having run a home department, as he was the permanent secretary of BIS before moving there. He has the world to look after. Next to him, we have Bob Kerslake, a great catch for the civil service, someone who is going to talk a bit about localism, but actually knows all about it. He ran Sheffield City Council, has had a whole range of jobs, brings enormous experience to the group of permanent secretaries. And we are very much a team because we have to work together to try and get departments to work together. Next is Helen Ghosh. Helen is the first ever woman to run that well-known female-friendly department, the Home Office. How she deals with the police will be something that she'll be explaining to us. And finally, Ian Watmore, who is a great catch for us from most of his career in the private sector. The amount of money that I had to sort out for his transfer from the private to the public sector. You know how, we talk about the Carlos Teveses and all the rest of it. Well, I had to negotiate Ian to come to us and accept a pretty dramatic pay reduction. But it doesn't matter because today is Ian's birthday. So, Ian will be talking us through the efficiency agenda and the challenges that places on us to work together to deliver all of that. So, enough from me. I think that's the sort of context for the civil service. I think it will be good for us, because it's always important for us to raise our sights, think about how this fits within the global context, to get a view from Simon about all those developments like the Arab Spring, what's happening in the Eurozone, the pigs, Portugal, Ireland, Greece. What does all of that mean for us in this room? Simon.
Thank you very much. I'd like to stand up if that's okay, provided you can see me. There's no problem with the lights. I'm assuming that's a yes. I'd just like to start by saying this has been a fantastically interesting year to be involved in foreign policy. It's been a real challenge. The government came in actually with a very energetic agenda for foreign policy. They wanted us to do a lot more economic and commercial diplomacy. They wanted us to build new relationships around the world. They wanted us to extend the reach of our international policy. We're opening 5 new embassies in the next couple of years. They wanted us to shift resources to build up relationships with emerging powers. So we came in from the very start with a really interesting, challenging, demanding agenda. I think it's a good agenda, and I've really enjoyed working on it. So that was great. But of course, like everybody else, we've had less resource with which to do that. The Foreign Office settlement, actually, in this spending round, I will admit, was not as tough as that of some other departments, but it's pretty tight. And it comes on top of some cuts that we've had in the last couple of years because of things like exchange rate movements. So we have got to make some pretty difficult decisions in how we pursue that agenda. So we're looking at our workforce structure, we're looking at our running costs around the world, we're looking at big savings on capital, just like other departments. And it's pretty hard and demanding. The answer that we've tried to put to that question is prioritization and focus, and we have tried to set some very clear priorities for British foreign policy going forward around promoting our national security, promoting our national prosperity, and serving British people overseas. And we're working around those 3 priorities in a clear way. We've also, in the Foreign Office, launched something called our Diplomatic Excellence Programme, which is our sort of reform and improvement programme for the office for the years ahead, to try to make us as effective as possible. So that's my introduction, and that's the sort of the plan, that's the agenda, and that's the plan, and I think it's a good agenda, and I think it's a good plan. But I briefly want to share with you 2 big lessons I've learnt this year about running the Foreign Office. And the first of those is just how vulnerable you are to events. So we have been through, in the last few months, the most amazing sequence of crises and international developments, political and consular, in North Africa, in the Middle East, in Japan, even in New Zealand with the earthquake. It's been a really extraordinary period, and extraordinary things have happened. And I've just got a few facts and figures that I just very quickly want to share with you. So in February, we had half a person working full-time in London on Libya. By the end of March, we had 70. We have helped 6,000 British people get evacuated from North Africa in that crisis period. We gave consular advice to 150,000 people in Japan during the tsunami, the earthquake, and the nuclear crisis. We now have 5 Middle East departments in the Foreign Office, whereas we used to have 1. And we ran a 24/7 crisis center involving members of other departments for, I think it was 9 successive weeks during the crisis period. So that's just an example of how you have to be prepared to deal with unexpected events. And that's not mentioning the Eurozone, that's not mentioning the death of bin Laden or the ongoing problem of our policy and our commitment in Afghanistan. So it's been really demanding, everybody's had to be flexible, and I just want to pay tribute actually to everybody for the way they've responded to that, both in London and, even more important, in our posts overseas, where people are really at the sharp end. And if you want to hear more about those things, we're running 2 great sessions, one today and one tomorrow, about the Arab Spring and about consular things. But the second lesson that I briefly want to mention by way of introduction, the second lesson that I have learned this year is just how important it is for the Foreign Office to be working with other departments in Whitehall and other sort of representative bodies of Britain overseas, because the international agenda is really intimately linked to the domestic agenda. And so often domestic problems, maybe Helen could pick this up, domestic problems have their upstream causes overseas. I was recently in Nairobi, where we have a mission there in which 10 departments and bodies are represented working together. It's a fantastic experience to go and see it. And so one of the themes I hope we'll pick up today is just how important cross-government working is on an international agenda, which really is a whole-of-government agenda. And if we're going to have impact on it, and if we're going to have effect, we really have to work it together. Thank you very much.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, Simon. So now we move from the global to the local. Bob, can you tell us what localism means?
Well, thank you very much, Gus. And there's so much I could talk about since I became what my daughter insists on calling a satsuma in November of this year. But I wanted to focus particularly on localism and decentralisation. Localism is essentially the view that this country is over-centralised, and we would get better results if we had a more devolved sharing of power. Decentralisation is the process of transferring power away from Whitehall and Westminster to people, communities, and indeed frontline professionals and staff. And to achieve that, we have to change not just what we do, but the way we do it. For example, we have to do less of targetry and less of information requirements and much more on local incentives and local discretion. We have to do more of flexibility around funding and less about prescribed funding. And whilst this is an agenda that communities and local government leads as a department, it's something that affects the whole of Whitehall. It impacts on every part of Whitehall. And I think it's an agenda that we can see will have a very big impact as it follows through. In practice, it means we've got to look at more transparency about the information, putting data out there and letting people see what we're doing and why we're doing it. It means more collaboration across Whitehall. If you want to do things like community budgets in localities, you have to be collaborating across government departments. You have to listen more to people outside of the civil service and take on board their insights as to how things can be done better. And you can see that very much in the listening exercise on the health service. So it's a fundamental change in the way in which business is done in the civil service, not just a change of policy. In many ways, it might be seen as quite threatening because we're seeing big job reductions. But actually, I think it's a very liberating agenda. And for me, it does 2 things for my department. The first is, I think what it does is it opens us up to new ways of achieving the goals that we have. So instead of regulation, we look at influence and behavioral economics. Instead of prescribing, we look at local incentives. a different way of thinking about the task we do, and I think that frees up creative thinking and more choice and activity for people on the ground. It also gives us as a department a defining mission. We're about localism, devolving power, and localities creating the conditions for local places to succeed. And last but not least, I think it helps us deliver the agenda of being smaller. We will reduce like every other government department, but crucially stronger. If we're doing less of the top-down prescription, that creates the space to do what we can do best and let others do best what they do on the ground. So it's an exciting agenda, I think embraces every part of the civil service, and it will definitely strengthen the capability of the civil service in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. Thank you. Helen, do you want to tell us what localism means in the Home Office?
Certainly. I must say that listening to Simon and then listening to Bob, I realised that one of the great attractions, and of course I'm a new girl in the Home Office, having been there 6 weeks, is that actually it's all of these... Sorry?
6 weeks?
Oh, 6 weeks. 6 months. 6 months. It's gone so quickly, it feels like 6 weeks. That the Home Office is about the international, it's about the national, and it's about the local. I suppose one of the most radical things we're doing within the Home Office, in the sense of just changing our relationship to a large part of society, is very local. It's about local accountability, it's about local transparency, and that's setting up the police and crime commissioners who will be in place. We'll be electing them, please turn out, from spring next year, and they will be responsible for policy, strategy, and money around local crime. And that will be backed up by transparency. I hope anyone here looked at their local crime map? Millions and millions, thank you, yes, I hope you have. Millions and millions of people across the country have looked at the crime maps that are on the internet, where you can see what the crimes are locally, and you can use that to hold your new police and crime commissioner to account. So that's the very local for us. Second thing, we have some things we have to do that are both international and national, and only central government can do. I suppose the two most obvious in that area are immigration and borders, and secondly, counter-terrorism. All of those have both in operational terms, I have lots of people who work in Simon's offices throughout the world, both in organisational terms and in terms of what happens in Afghanistan, what happens in Libya, has an effect in your backyard. And so there are some things we have to do nationally as a department. And in one particular area, organised crime, which again has national and international characteristics, we're building a new national crime agency, which will pull that together, all those issues together across government, and that's another big project. So we've got big projects, we've got the same efficiency challenge that all departments have got. Across the department, we're doing a number of things actually that we would have done anyway. Even if it had not been for reducing the budget deficit, a lot of the things we're doing in terms of IT-enabled business change will mean that we would anyway have downsized. So, for example, we're putting all those piles of paper that anyone who's ever been to Croydon has seen, all of those piles of paper on immigration applications, visa applications, they're going online into a new IT system to support our caseworkers. And equally, those of you who turn up at Heathrow or Gatwick in coming years will find you can just walk through automatic gates with your chipped passport, and we won't need so many people for you to queue in front of to check your passport. So all those things are, in terms of change and restructuring and the impact on people, very profound in terms of our management challenge. Just to say, in the last 6 months, being new in the job, I've been getting out and about. I've been going to Manchester, to Liverpool, to Heathrow, to Gatwick, to Dover, to discover from the front line what the experience of working in the Home Office is like and what people's ideas are about the department we need to be for the future. I just wanted to share 4 quick impressions that I've got, which in many ways just reinforce things I knew anyway and have been reminded of in this role. I think the first thing is that everybody wants to feel that the thing they do is significant. People in the Home Office are fantastically proud of the fact that we have a very clear mission, and that's to keep the British public safe. And almost everything we do fits within that, and there's a tremendous level of pride and pride in our professionalism. So that sense, we as civil service leaders need to give to our teams the significance of what they do. They want to know what the story is. They want us to repeat. They want to hear over and over again what the future looks like. What do we think the future looks like for them, for their teams, for their job, for the future of the department, the skills they need, all those sorts of things. We can never talk about that enough and share with our staff enough those sorts of messages. And I think one thing, again, I've been reminded of, I'm sure all of us sitting here, actually I don't know what their Myers-Briggs makeup may be, I'm an INTJ, which means I believe in being very rational about things. One thing I've learned as a leader is actually when you're talking to people about the future, particularly their future, you need to have emotional intelligence. You need to be able to communicate in a way that you would understand if you were in that position. So that importance of emotional intelligence in leadership, fantastically important. I think the third thing that comes across, staff care as much about high performance as leaders do. The Home Office score in our staff engagement survey on do you deal well with poor performance was 37%. And I've had a tremendous upswell of support for the idea that we need to deal better with poor performance. People want new performance systems. People want to do 360-degree reporting, particularly on their managers. They want us to deal with performance better. Last of all, I think the most powerful message I've got from staff going around the country is that they want to feel more empowered. An awful lot of people, particularly at middle management level, but, you know, hey, I'm sure even Gus feels disempowered sometimes, they want to feel that what they do is recognised, that if they have an idea, it's listened to, that when they've done something well, we celebrate and congratulate them. And the most, we did a survey monkey thing the other day, and the number one thing people wanted on the back of what would make you feel more empowered was somebody saying thank you and congratulating me when I did something well. That's easy. I took away a great positive about that, and I'm determined to celebrate the things that teams across the Home Office do. So can I just say, before I sit back down on my rather uncomfortable bar stool, can I just say thank you to all of you on behalf of all those people who may not have thanked you enough. Thank you very much.
Very good. Thank you, Helen. The agenda there, we're beginning to see all of us trying to produce better results, improve our departments, but obviously fewer resources. So, Ian, are you going to talk to us about better for less?
Okay, thank you, Gus. Good morning, everybody. When I came back here and spoke at this event last year, the government had just announced that it was doing £6 billion of budget cuts for the year we've just completed. And our task collectively was to try and find as much of that £6 billion without impacting frontline services. Well, over the last year, we've accumulated nearly £4 billion. We're having the figures audited at the moment. But nearly £4 billion of that 6 came from those sorts of initiatives. A few examples. We were 70% down spend on consulting in the year. We were 70% down on expenditure on marketing, particularly television advertising. We saved 800 million from our supplier bills just by renegotiating the deals with the contracts, not with cutting what they provided to us. We closed about 400 million worth of projects and so on. And in the end, the only contribution that the civil service staff reductions made was about 10% of that total, as the civil service shrank by about 17,000 people. So a lot of people go around and say, can't we make the savings in places which don't impact jobs and don't impact frontline? Well, I think all of you collectively in your departments have been doing that in this last year. And I think the numbers that you've achieved stand testimony to that. So I think that's a huge achievement for the year. However, what we also know is that we're not going to achieve continued reductions in expenditure without doing things differently. And that's why I think the reform agenda is so critical. And mostly in the last year, we've been laying down the foundations for that reform. It all lies ahead of us. For example, in the civil society area, working with a whole load of institutions to try and get more social finance into the social enterprise sector. Working with organisations in the communities to create mutuals and social enterprises to provide local services in a very customised way. Working more strategically within the civil service at looking at different models for how the civil service can operate, including embarking on our first mutual organisation within the civil service. As Helen alluded to, using the new technologies, in fact, they're not new anymore. They're mainstream in every other bit of our lives. We should be mainstreaming them in every bit of government life. And so laying down the mantra of putting public services online by default, digital by default. And of course, working with the private sector in a different way. In particular, we've got ourselves trapped into an oligopoly of a small number of very large companies, whereas there's so much that the small and medium enterprise sector can do for us. And yet we as government do remarkably little business with them. So it's how we open our boundaries to them. So I think the first year message is one of great achievement in terms of the efficiency agenda. But the real heavy lifting lies ahead, because we've only just started on the 80 billion that lies ahead in the spending review cuts. And that means doing things remarkably differently using some of the techniques that I've outlined. People often ask me, what's it like being back? Well, the thing that I have found most annoying about being back is the way the press slag off the public and civil servants. And perhaps my high point for the year was I had the opportunity to get a letter published in the FT which pushed back on all of that. There was one random survey that said it doesn't matter how many civil servants leave, the private sector will never hire them because they've got no skills that are useful in the private sector. And I got so angry about that, kind of wrote a letter, and it got published. I think the first time in my life I've had a letter published. But what started off as, I'm sure I can give 3 or 4 really good examples, just became a dozen or 20. And I said things like, you think in the private sector you're good at HR, have you ever tried to put a civilian in Helmand Province? You think you're good at operational management, have you ever tried running a prison on the Isle of Wight full of sex offenders? These are the sorts of things that people in our world do day in, day out. They do remarkably difficult jobs. In my opinion, they do it every bit as well as anybody in private or voluntary sector do. And so I suppose my message to all of you is thank you for what you do and what you continue to do as we embark upon this reform journey.
Thank you. Right, that's a very good note to finish on. And since Ian gave a plug to his FT letter, I should give a plug to an article I wrote in The Guardian earlier, which I hope got circulated around to try and destroy some of these myths about how much we're paid and how big our pensions are on average. So, lots of issues there. Now it's time for you to engage. We are very keen to get your questions. If you could, there are roving mics around the room. Please put your hands up, and if you could say your name and department, that would be very helpful. So, sir, there. Could we get a mic to this person? If we could queue up 2 or 3 other people, so if you want to grab someone, anyone else over there wants to come in?
Graham Henderson, Department of Health. On a similar theme, what do the panel think about the Prime Minister's statement that civil servants are major barriers to enterprise, although he did use rather more inflammatory language than that?
Okay, since that's about the Prime Minister, I'll start off. And he said enemies to enterprise. Let's be clear. And it was a phrase that he and I discussed at some length afterwards. And it's one of those things that I really want to put to bed, this illusion that we are anti-enterprise. And one of the things that I'm doing personally is taking charge of a red tape challenge where we're looking at regulation, we're going across all of the sectors, all of the departments. Basically, for example, we did the retailing sector first of all, putting all of the regulations online and then saying to people, okay, your small and medium-sized enterprises, all the people that deal with these retailers, tell us which ones we can get rid of. It does turn out that we have a regulation saying you must not trade with the enemy. Right? Enemy brackets Denmark. I wasn't completely aware that Denmark was a kind of existential threat to the UK and that trading with them. This whole set of bonkers things we've got, so we can get rid of those. There are plenty of other areas where, for example, the retailers are very worried about age-related sales. It's quite hard for them to work out. Lots of different regulations. We can improve that. So I think what we have to do is change. People come in with some myths, and we need to change their minds, demonstrate to them that actually we strongly believe in enterprise. Let's face it, a vibrant private sector will provide the tax base for us to fund good public services and the civil services part of that. So there isn't an either or, there's a both, and we can be massively into that. Now, I suppose, Simon.
Well, I'd really like to come in on this because I've just come to this event from a breakfast meeting this morning with the British business ambassadors held in Biz. This is a group of sort of leading businessmen who've engaged to work with us, with Biz, with UKTI, to promote British business around the world. And that's part of the commercial diplomacy agenda, which we're focusing on. I mentioned it already, which we're focusing on a lot. So I think that we are doing everything we can to support enterprise and to support business around the world. I think it's really important. And I'm very impressed. We published in the Foreign Office something called our Charter for Business. UKTI have just published their new strategy. So there's a lot going on, and I'm sure the Prime Minister's aware of all that.
He is. Right, more questions, please, because I'm trying not to get all of the panel to answer every question so we get more time for you. Yes, lady in the front.
Hello, my name is Tessa Mulcahy and I work for HM Revenue and Customs. There was an issue raised earlier about people slagging off civil servants. I think one of the areas they've been criticised, for example, is like their helpline services. When I work in VAT inquiries, written VAT inquiries, and we have several criticisms about the VAT helpline, people can't get through, they get cut off, etc. This has been going on for a long time, but what has been done about it? It doesn't really do much, to redeem our reputation, does it?
Okay. That's the Ian. Do you want to have a go on IT?
I obviously can't speak about the specifics. I don't know the details. But I think the trend increasingly actually is to make the stuff available on the web so that people can serve themselves when they want to. And one of the sessions that we're running later today here in Olympia is with the post office for how they could be that surrogate sort of digital provider for people who don't actually use the internet themselves. Because I think people increasingly in the private sector fed up with call centres as well as in the public. And if you take something like British Airways, who effectively went bust 6-7 years ago, they've completely reinvented their airline around the internet. And not only are they getting much lower costs throughout the organisation, their customer service ratings have gone sky high because the same evidence comes through from the private sector about people hate dealing with clunky call centres and being put on hold. And anybody that's had to deal with, I better not list all the companies, but you know the ones I mean, they're just as bad as anything that we deal with. And we actually had a very nice letter in recently from Sue Street, who used to be a PubSec in DCMS, I think, who said she'd had a death in her family, I think, and in dealing with the organisations, public and private, she'd overwhelmingly found the public sector to be more sympathetic, more responsive and more helpful. And she said it actually put private sector colleagues in the shade.
Thanks, Ian. I mean, one of the broader messages as well is we are trying very hard to save the money from the whole of the operations in order to get money to invest to improve our systems. I know, because like all these members of the panel, I spend a lot of time going out to visit civil servants at the front line. I'm very aware a lot of them say, I could provide a better service to the public if I had better tools to work with. And we are trying to work on improving those systems. Often we've got lots of legacy systems. We've changed the rules, we've changed the benefit, the tax system. So it is hard to make sure that we can get the systems up to speed and always maintain a service to everybody. But the plan is to try and save enough money to invest in better systems so that we can allow you to deliver better for the public, which I know is what you want to do. Yes.
Siobhan Bonita, Department of Health. I'd just like to pick up on something that Ian mentioned about efficiencies, and it's great that we're down our spend on consultants, for example, by 70%, because we spent a lot on them before, probably for very little benefit. But in other areas, for example, like marketing spend, is there a danger when we're trying to change people's behaviours and actually prevent problems happening in the first place, that we might do something now knee-jerk that actually we suffer from in the long term, and shouldn't we be maintaining funding in those kind of areas?
Yeah, I mean, not to hog it, Gus, but I think just to respond to that, yes, there is a risk always that if you, I mean, marketing is there for a reason in any organisation. I think where this government is particularly critical is of what they regard as the plethora of television advertising campaigns that go on that don't particularly hit their mark. They cost a lot of money, and they're actually much more there are better ways of doing it. So they talk a lot about the so-called nudge theory, the behavioral economics, in order to be able to try and get people to change their behaviors in other ways rather than broadcasting at them over the TV and radio airwaves. So I think they would say that they've cut out the stuff that they think was superfluous. They're protecting the stuff that they think is needed in that form. But most importantly, they're trying to change the dynamic to be a different one in order to change people's behaviours and less about the traditional let's throw a TV ad campaign at it.
Thanks, Ian. Bob and then Helen. Go on.
Just one quick comment, if that's okay.
Yeah.
So are we still going to be able to do, I mean, I've been very impressed when you look at the record of things like the wonderful Department of Transport, road safety campaigns and things like, you know, belting up in the back seat. Will people still be able to do that kind of thing, which really did work?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And in fact, what people want to do is say, if that was very successful, can't we broaden that expertise and use it to do broader-based safety campaigns?
Yeah.
Bob.
If I could just add something to that, I think one of the campaigns that has been running CLG for quite a few years, very successful, is the Fire Kills campaign, reducing the problems of fires in the homes. And if you look at the statistics, the impact has been very significant. We've continued to run that campaign, but by working with the radio stations, for example, we've been able to get time on the radio stations without being charged for it. So we've still run an effective campaign, but with a significantly reduced cost. And I think that's an example of kind of creative thinking from people in the department to continue to do that work that we need to do, but find a way of doing it that costs the taxpayer less.
Yeah.
And I think there is a general example here. I run something called the Behavioural Insight Team that picks up these new ideas. One thing we did was we had a lot of people who, and the lady works for HMRC, who owe tax, dare I say it, shock horror. And we send them a letter telling them how much they owe and asking them to pay us, surprise, surprise. And we changed that letter. We decided, working with social norms, people care about social norms. We've added a paragraph which basically says, do you realise that in your area, 95% of people have already paid their tax? By putting in that one paragraph, which actually costs us close to zero, we have increased quite dramatically the amount of tax we are collecting from those people. Now, that's a tiny little tweak. It cost us virtually nothing. If you think about the creativity that's in this audience, and you all thought about those sorts of changes, and I know in departments everyone's trying to get to this, we could make enormous difference to the way we operate. And it's not just about expensive advertising campaigns, but I do know that there are some fantastic advertising campaigns that have also made a difference. So it's getting the balance right. There's a gentleman there.
Mike Carson, Home Office. I'm struggling a bit to see the implications of the localism agenda. And one example, we looked at business crime a couple of years ago and worked out that the police were doing about 20 different, well, they had 22 different approaches to tackling business crime. And obviously at the top end, it may be the national approach. But where do we draw the line? How do we avoid a postcode lottery in services?
Okay, that's a good question. Do you want Helen? And
shall I kick off and then hand over to Bob? I think, not to anticipate what Bob might say, of course there might be a postcode lottery, and that is the whole point of localism. If you take the specific crime issues that you were talking about, what we want our police and crime commissioners to do, supported by local people, supported by the Accountability Backed Crime Maps, is to decide what they want to focus on a local level. So you might well get two adjoining police forces deciding on the one hand they want to focus on domestic burglary, and on the other hand they want to focus on antisocial behaviour on the streets, and put their people, their officers and their money into different kinds of things. And that's what local democracy is about. And in that sense, you might well find that they're not pursuing your crime with as much enthusiasm, the crime of which you were a victim, in one place than they would have done in another. But that's not the same as saying that we don't try and make sure that everybody knows, wherever they are in the country, what is the best way to deal with crime X if you are trying to reduce antisocial behaviour, what are the best techniques for doing it? And back to the, what is the Home Office there for? I think a lot of my staff feel rather unnerved, and perhaps you do yourself, at the idea that you're saying for the first time, that we do not have the following 100 prescribed targets for what you shall do. Over to you. We are going to let go, but we do still need to make sure as a department that we are supporting through research, through analysis, through data, police forces and local people to know what is the best way to deal with things. And I think that is a profound shift between where we are now, which is very command and control, and where we want to get to, which is sort of enabling and facilitating and doing the things that a central government can do best.
Thanks. Bob?
I think Helen's covered it very well, but just let me add 2 points that go beyond, if you like, the issues to do with the police service. The first point I'd make is that centralised systems haven't always of themselves led to even service and even performance, and we know that from all the work that we've done over the years. So you can't assume that a centralised model doesn't lead to unevenness and difference. The second point I'd make is that I think one of the things you get with a more decentralised model is more space for local innovation. You see new ideas come forward. I remember many years ago going to a school in Birmingham that was the first school that had developed the local management of schools model, devolving power to the head. It hadn't happened, didn't come from central government, it came from a local authority saying, let's try a new approach. Many of the models around public-private partnership came from local innovation. So decentralisation can create the space for local innovation, whether it's frontline services, police forces or local authorities. The challenge for us is to create systems in which that innovation moves quickly to other places, that the collaborative models we have persuade people that it's worth picking it up and overcoming what are often the parochial, not invented here views about things. So I think it changes our role to being enablers, to facilitating exchange of ideas and innovation, ensuring that where good ideas happen, they don't take an awful long time to travel to others.
Okay, more questions, please. Yes, there's a gentleman there.
Hello, my name is Alex Cook from the Animal Health and Veterinary Laboratories Agency. I was also interested in the question of localism. Our agency currently operates from multiple sites and has a national network, but in order to save costs, we anticipate shrinking that network. I wonder what experiences you might have as to how we might resolve that apparent paradox perceived from the outside of a reduced national network at the same time as attempting to increase local engagement.
Okay. Who'd like to go first on that? Helen?
Well, shall I say a bit, because it's a former DEFRA colleague, so I know a bit about the background. I think what we need to, and I'm familiar with the programme you describe, I think what one needs to separate out in thinking about this is what are the services that genuinely need to be delivered geographically, locally, and the question of how you provide the best possible service looking at the country overall. You're quite right in saying that and this is true I think of many of our local offices, whether it's DWP, whether it's HMRC, whether it's some of our scientific laboratories, where offices are at the moment is to some extent a historical accident. It's very often they just happen to be where the offices, where the laboratories have been, for the last 50 years. And it's a terrible wrench, both for the local communities and for people working in them. If you say, actually, we can, if we think carefully about how we provide the services, and in particular with new technology, provide the same level of service in responding to local needs and to local people, but with fewer geographical locations. So we need to look at the local issues in terms of the impact on services that really need face-to-face service against the services that we could provide if we just thought of a different business model. And I think this brings you back to some of the points that Ian made about how we can get people to do more online. They don't need to go into the local tax office, the local job centre plus. the local DVLA office if they can get a wonderful service online. So I think, for example, in the case you describe, we've thought about the network of laboratories in the animal health and veterinary space and concluded that actually we can continue, if we run ourselves in a different way, to provide the same service in emergencies to farmers, to companies, if we think differently about how we do it. So I think there's a risk that we confuse genuine local services that need to be delivered locally and the places we just happen to be as central government.
Thanks, Helen. There's a question over there.
Dave Greenwood, HMRC Online Services. I just want to come back on what Ian Watmore said about helplines and online services. Although I'm happy to hear that online is going to be the default sort of setting for our customers, I deal with a lot of complaints where people try to use the online services and hit a problem, and they do complain about the sort of support they get both from Aspire, the length of time it takes to sort out what they feel is relatively simple issues, and also getting through to the helplines as well. And I thought the earlier answer about just moving them from helplines to online sort of dismissed the issue a little bit, in that these customers are, I think in the new terms, willing and able and want to, say, file a tax return or deal with us online, but they're unhappy with the level of support they get when they try to get through and can't, or if they can get through, at the sort of length of time or speed. The other issue is if when they can't get through, they try ringing other areas of, in my case, HMRC. And although we're now pretty much an online business, a lot of my colleagues elsewhere in the network know about the online filing, but not necessarily the mechanics of it. And there's a training need there. I'm just wondering, is it going to be sort of looked at that if all civil service becomes online by default, that we're not only aware of it, that we know about the mechanics as well?
Okay, Ian.
Yeah, sorry if it sounded dismissive in the earlier one, but Martha Lane Fox did a very good report on this at Christmas time, I think it was, on what she thinks the whole digital by default journey is all about. And if you haven't had a look at that, I recommend you do. Her view is not only do you need to put it online, but you actually have to put it online, and it has to be world class for the customer. It has to be absolutely designed around their needs. And too many times our online services are bolt-ons to a different sort of process that started with more of the way we structure the benefit of the tax credit or whatever it is in terms of the way we deal with the customer. So putting it online is only part of the story. It has to be put online really, really well with design of the customer at the heart. And then you then need to have really great backup for people when that fails and when they can't get through. And but that ought to be a much more of a minority of cases, and therefore you can invest more in that support per customer is the general thesis. We have literally, starting today, it's his first day, hired the guy who runs all the Guardian website and media, Mike Bracken, who's joining today. And his job is to lead on all of this, and it really is to run the things that are already run, like DirectGov, and just bring them into the sort of modern technology sphere. To work with departments like HMRC, who do a very good job actually on the main and this, but just to make sure that all of their services are really top quality. 3, to close down the alternates piece by piece, because that's where the real cost goes. And then 4, invest in the help and support mechanisms that sit behind it. And that's a long journey for something as very broad as government, but it's something that over the next 2 or 3 years I think we can really break the back of, and that's what Mike is joining us to do.
Thanks very much, Ian. Simon.
Can I just come in? You may not think that this is a question that's particularly relevant to the Foreign Office, but actually it really rings a bell with me, this point about call centres and helplines. I mean, when we had our really difficult week in February on Libya, when the aircraft didn't take off and we were under a lot of pressure on the consular side, the thing that did most damage to our public image was the fact that we didn't have enough capacity on the call centre. And I just learned so much from that. We're publishing this week a public inquiry that we've done into the lessons we learned from that, and that is a lesson that is right front and centre, and we're really trying to fix it now. It makes so much difference.
I think one of the things we all know is that we're not just providers of these services, but we're consumers. So having done car tax for a long time, and that's an excellent service, and having done my income tax online, I know how that service has moved forward over the years. I remember the first year just being in despair, to be perfectly honest. It took me quite a long time. This year it was fine. I think these things are getting better, but it's absolutely right that we will need to improve them through time. Now, I've got time, I think, for one more. Yes, over there.
Oh, hi. Mukun Lad from Communities and Local Government. There have been a lot of changes to policies and programmes since the election. I'd just like to get the panel's views on what robust monitoring and evaluation schemes are going to put into place and how they're going to challenge government ministers to stop things that don't work or deliver any benefits, even if they're against ideas they hold dear.
It's a very good point. Bob wants to start?
Yeah, I'll kick off, really, since the question came from the department. I think one of the key things that I've learned in my time in public service is the importance of effective programme and project management. And if you get that inculcated into the way you do business, you will do the right things, you will approach problems in the right way, so you won't start projects until you've worked through the business case. You will have built-in gateways, you will have built-in evaluation processes. So I think the most important thing for me is that we have clearly identified programs and projects and that we use the disciplines that go with effective program and project management. Often people think this is bureaucracy, but if you do it in the right way, it will properly test the outcomes in the process. So we're making some quite big changes, like the new homes bonus. We will build in an evaluation process to see whether that works later on. And inevitably, if some of these things don't work as anticipated, there's going to be some challenging conversations. But part of our role as civil servants is to say those difficult things, even if they're not always popularly received, let's put it that way.
Thanks, Bob. Helen?
Listening to your question, I was thinking, actually, if you look at the great history of, let's call it, U-turns over the last few months, actually, that's ministers looking at policies and issues and deciding to be flexible and changing their minds, which I think is a terrifically good thing, and as the Prime Minister would say, a sign of strength. My observation is that at the heart of what we need to do as civil servants in making policy is make sure at the beginning of the process we know what the problem is we're trying to solve. And if you look at any classic, how do you make policy and policy that is deliverable, it's what is the problem that you're trying to solve. And in a sense, with a government coming in, with a coalition government, with the coalition programme, we had a sort of ready-made set of solutions without, as a group of civil servants, really understanding the problem that was in the minds of politicians when they set out their manifestos. And so I do think inevitably at this stage in a government, you get a bit of friction, a bit of rubbing up. What was the problem that this policy was solving? How do we adapt the policy? Now we understand better what the real problem was that was there to be solved, and you will and you are seeing that kind of development as policies are rolled out. I think our obligation for the future is to make sure that we are rigorous, both in identifying the problem, identifying the context, have the deliverers in the room when we think what the solution to the problem is, so we know it genuinely is deliverable. And I was brought up many years ago, 30 years ago, in the old Department of the Environment, which is now transmogrified into CLG. It had the most wonderful tradition of social research, economic research on evaluation and monitoring, and I have certainly learnt that lesson, and in the Home Office we shall be making sure that we do evaluate the things we're now doing.
Thank you. Right, I think I'm going to allow the panel all to just have one last response each, but the general point I'm going to get to them is, A, what's the one thing you love about being in the civil service? B, I'm going to throw in an extra bit. So for Simon, it's like, what's the difference between running a foreign office versus a home department? Bob, what's the difference between running a home department and a local and Sheffield? Helen, so what's the difference between being a man and a woman running the Home Office? And Ian, what's your best birthday present, right? So Simon.
On the first question about what I like about working and doing the job I do, I mean, there's a sort of motivation and there's an inspiration. The motivation is actually the feeling that I can make a difference, whether it's in people's lives or in national interest or indeed in this job, a little bit in the world, and that's a tremendous motivation. But the inspiration actually that I've experienced in this job this year has been the people I've worked with, because I was just deeply, deeply impressed by what the civil servants in the Foreign Office and others working with them did during that period of crisis that we lived through, coming in, working nights, working weekends, not for monetary reward, but because of their loyalty to the organisation, at a time when, let's face it, we're all under quite a lot of pressure in a number of ways. I thought that was hugely motivating and rewarding. And I'd also like to say a word for those many people who work for us overseas who are not even British nationals, who work in our embassies overseas, who give that same sort of commitment. That's really inspirational. On the difference between a Home Department and the Foreign Office, they are different. And I pointed out one of the things, in the Foreign Office you are just so vulnerable to things going off all around the world. So when you wake up in the morning, you really don't know until you turn the radio on what your agenda is going to be for that day. That's the same at the Home Office. I think it's even more in a Home Department. I think it's even more in the Foreign Office. But the big challenge from it is the other point I made earlier. We've got to get better at working with the Home Departments and with other parts of government in order to have a more effective combined effort overseas. I'm absolutely convinced about that.
Thanks very much, Simon. Bob?
Yeah, I think the thing that I've loved most about the civil service since I've come into this job is the sheer concentration of talent, expertise and commitment. If you haven't worked in, if you've worked in the civil service all your lives, you probably wouldn't see the difference to other organisations. But I haven't. I've come in and I've seen it for myself. And if I had one message to ministers, it would be, don't take that talent and expertise for granted. It is a very, very powerful resource that they have that they need to nurture and develop, because it's really the foundation of how they perform and deliver. So that would be the thing I'd say I like most about the civil service. The thing I think people need to work on is the self-esteem. Feel more confident, more assertive, be prepared to challenge. I may regret saying this later on. But I think there is a sense in which people feel done to and moan about it. I'd rather they felt they were empowered and challenged, to be frank. And that would be the thing I would really want to change. How is it different from local government? You're less close to the immediate issues. I remember one of the things I did when I was in Sheffield was to go around to community groups. And anybody who knows Sheffield know it's a very hilly place. And I remember one lady of 70 saying to me that she loved where she lived in Sheffield, but she was getting on in her years and it was very hilly, and what was I going to do about it? You don't get those kind of questions in the civil service.
Thanks very much, Bob. Helen?
What do I love about the civil service? I think what I love is the sense that I'm part of a team, a great team. I've loved working in teams in all the many departments I've worked in. I've loved building teams. The sense that we are all there for the same fundamental reason, which is serving the public and making things better, I think is something that really, gets to my inner core, and is something that I always value. And when I felt unhappy in jobs, and I have felt unhappy in jobs, it's been where I just find it impossible to build a sense of team, where the organisation seems internally at war with itself. And I know I really hate that, and I will, in those organisations, make it a mission as a leader, either to create a microclimate or better than that, and that's the great privilege we have as permanent secretaries, trying to make a whole organisation feel as a team. So teamwork, I think, is what I love about the civil service. Your question was, I think, unanswerable, as any analyst would say, because I don't know what being a man as head of the Home Office would be like. I will pick you up on one thing, which is it's not a female-friendly department. Well, actually, and if anyone can put their hand up and rival this, we have a female Secretary of State, the Home Secretary Theresa May. We have a female lead non-executive in Val Gooding, ex-Bupa, and there is a female permanent secretary. And if anyone, any other government department can match that, I'd like to hear about it. It is a very, I'm a 30-year civil servant, and I've been in a number of departments and contexts. What I would say about the Home Office, and I hope that my Home Office colleagues here would recognise, it's a department that deals with very difficult issues in very difficult contexts. There's almost nothing we do in the Home Office that is an easy policy. a policy that is uncontroversial, that everybody rises up and agrees on. And we deal with events, just like Simon. A number of Simon's events are our events. You know, we had lots of UKVA people helping evacuate from Libya or from Egypt. And certainly in the security realm, you can wake up in the morning and hear, hear the news, and I have 5 stories. What I do think is a benefit as a woman is something, and sorry, that's presumptuous, emotional resilience. I think we all need, as leaders, emotional resilience. All of us live lives that are under pressure. I think I've been very lucky in that, as a woman, it's perhaps easier to get that mental sense of perspective from the children you have, from the domestic life you have, just to see your life in a slightly more balanced sort of way. But I know that we all have, ways we find that emotional resilience, and everybody has to have some kind of escape clause. As I say, for me as a woman and as a mother, that's a very valuable escape clause. And also when I think things are going badly, I think, well, one thing I've achieved is these 2 children. So that keeps me going.
Thank you very much, Helen. Thank you for that challenge. It shows you that amongst the group of permanent secretaries, we're strong on challenge and very short on deference. Now to the birthday boy.
Thank you, Gus.
I'm not going to let him forget.
Well, I mean, going last, they've nicked all the best lines. I mean, the sense of being in the centre of it all. Absolutely right. Confidence in the organisation, I think, is key. I answered that with the letter point. I think you should draw confidence that you are better than the rest, not just as good as the rest, and deal with that. Diversity is another great strength of the system. I think we had before Manoush inconveniently resigned, we had exactly half the perm secs were women for the first time ever, which I think is a massively good story, and one that the private sector never gets close to matching. On my worst days in the civil service, I wake up and think, thank goodness I'm not dealing with FIFA or the Premier League anymore. Corruption and frustration with capital C's and F's. And my best birthday present, well, I mean, loads really. My wife we went to Chester Cathedral on Sunday. She started life when I met her as an investment banker, and she's now training to be a vicar. Which is a good story in itself. And it was great to be there at the cathedral with all the sort of ordinands that she's going through the system with at the moment. I'm having dinner tonight with my son, who's just finished his university life before he starts his job, so that will be great. But the best physical present I had was a book given to me called The Twitters of Sir Bonner Kingdom Neville, which is a spoof book of the Henry Roots type around a modern-day perm sec tweeting to the public. And it is absolutely classic. It ends, his last tweet is, "I am the Tsar of Tsars," which I think is something that I should now start to make my call sign. So,
Brilliant, Ian. Thank you very much. And thank you, audience, for your questions. The thing I love is basically engaging with civil servants who every day show pride and passion and pace and professionalism. Being able to reward them, civil service awards, all of those sorts of things. Again, I look forward to meeting you. There are lots of events during the day. Please make the most of your time here and enjoy and feel very free to engage as much as possible and make sure this is a two-way event. So could you please thank the panel? Thank you. Thank you.